All right, let's see Steven Crowder's perspective on why not everyone deserves voting rights. This is my favorite thing about covering white people as a whole, or people that believe in capitalism, because they oftentimes snitch on themselves and oftentimes tell people that they do not believe in everyone being equal. And this is my favorite part because this is the exploitative measures that they hide from a lot of you.
Over 5 million people in the US can't vote as a result of felony disenfranchisement.
Good.
So denying people in prison the right to vote continues a whole history of denying people of color access to representation.
Let's say a violent murderer, thief, rapist gets to vote on rape laws. You see the problem, right? What if I were to tell you that there is a way to solve 90%, if not all of the problems facing the Western world, or certainly here in the United States, where with just a couple of tweaks that, by the way, not only, it wouldn't be unprecedented, it would be totally in line with human history and American history until the 1900s. You just make a couple of tweaks and you would never have a Marxist, a radical Democrat again. It can be done. The problem is it's an issue that everyone's afraid to discuss because they think it may be unpopular or it may alienate people. Well, we saw how that went with Donald Trump, right? Dealing with immigration. That was a third where you didn't. That's why all these Republicans were rushing to push amnesty because they wanted to buy them votes. Donald Trump, lifted the veil. This issue was one of those issues. So let me just give you a brief refresher. You've heard me give my thoughts on voting, and I stand by it. I want to expound upon it. Here's how you have a government for the people, by the people. I know it sounds counterintuitive. Everyone should be able to vote. Are you starting to get the picture? 1, only those in mandatory selective service. As long as the draft exists, only those in it get to vote. Ladies, take your pick. Draft.
Military indoctrination, one of the key steps into a fascistic empire. Trusting the people who kill for you because Darwin matters more than the concept of humanity and law and order. They want to enact it by force, which is the concept of the beginning of civilization, that you need people to kill to establish your ideology and kill for your ideology of just law and order and civility and legislation and anything else that comes after to the governance like judiciaries or executive branches. You're going to have to push for this concept of having the absolute power. So his people that he wants to vote are the number one is the people of power, absolute power, which is the Darwinistic people.
Draft or vote, right? You want to then draft. Number 2, legal citizen. Of course, this is overwhelmingly supported. This shouldn't.
Creates a division of legal citizens versus not legal citizen. I understand the perspective. They don't want a bunch of people from another country voting, but if those people are paying taxes and they come here and they want to be a part of this citizenry, then they're gonna have to vote for something that makes them want to stay instead of running with the money, which all of them are accused of, so they can stay here and spend their money and become a naturalized American citizen. They have the right to vote, in my opinion, but a lot of the times, a lot of these white people hate it because they're scared of foreign intervention from a bunch of societies. Meanwhile, they have APAC with a bunch of legal citizens just funding millions and millions of dollars. They don't need immigrants for that. They just have money. So you're already infiltrated through corporatism. So it's pointless to blame it on the immigrant.
Be controversial, except for Democrats, because I think it's hard to get ID. Number 3, you have to have paid taxes for at least 3 years to show that you have skin in the game and be paying taxes this current year. And
taxes, because of course he doesn't want to give any voting rights to the people of the impoverished means who are not giving any opportunity in jobs, anyone that actually has any chance to succeed in our society. He doesn't like the concept of anyone in the lowest levels of society voting, which happened to be another word for black and brown, which of course he'll play defense and saying that's racist because he says there's plenty white people there too. But if you look at the statistics, it mainly the hegemony that attacks a lot of black and brown people. It does not look at the white people as the ones that don't pay taxes because they're the ones who are often given the bias and racial bias of being seen as more human and more qualified in a society of a white ethno state.
4, 1 vote per household.
And that's just patriarchal dog whistling. He wants the man of the house to vote and dictate the entire thing, to give the men the opportunity and ability to speak over the women and talk over their sons and daughters in order to tell them to get out the house in some conservative Christian perspective of just go live on yourself, fend for yourself. I don't care if you're homeless. You're supposed to be an adult by now. You're supposed to impregnate a woman and get a family. If you can't do that, you're an inferior species, which is just indoctrination of Darwin again. So he has the Darwinistic principles of you better pay, you better kill, you better fuck, or you better listen to your patriarchal dad. And then you have the final one, which is a legal citizen, because he wants to keep it within the realm of people that can be indoctrinated through educational facilities that raise them since they were young in order to get them in line with the compliance of what they call a normal means of what they nationalize a socialist perspective is that you can only have the right to vote if you grew up here and you know people here and you pay people here and you kill for people here, because it's going to become a much more militarized, disciplined, fascistic society. He wants order beyond order. He wants discipline beyond discipline. And he wants the old days of being able to backhand your wife and your kids because they should go and do what they're told rather than have their own opinions. Do that in someone else's house. It's my house. Old school thinker.
And really, all those things end up leading you to the de facto, what we always had, one vote per household. But household voting, this is not novel. It's not new. Sometimes it was structured in a different way, like we said, landowners, right, paying taxes. Voting, just to be clear, when we talk about constitutional republic, I don't even like the term democratic republic because then people just think democracy at large. By the way, a lot of democracies that you think of as democracies still had much more stringent stipulations on who could vote. Mm-hmm. Historically, like, of course criminals can't vote. Of course, if you're not paying any taxes, if you don't own anything, if you contribute nothing, well, then we would just have a country where people infest it and vote stuff for themselves at the cost of everybody else. This was known to be the case. It was the baseline. Voting was never meant to be a fundamental constitutional civil right for everybody within the borders of the United States. We are a representative republic, and the republic was meant to represent those who could create and sustain a country. Those are who are meant to be represented. Let me give you a few key facts here. One, historically, voting in the United States was restricted to land and property owners, over 21 years old, 21 plus. There were religious literacy tests, largely white men. That brings us to fact number two, because I know what people are going to say, you know, slavery. Here's the thing. The founding fathers, and I'm going to give you some references, some quotes. The one from John Adams is frankly fantastic. There's not much I can add to it. It's perfect. They knew they were going to have to reconcile slavery. They knew it was immoral. They discussed that, and even in that context, but of course, not everybody should be able to vote. Of course, it still has to be contributors. In other words, they already understood this. It was baked in. Well, at some point, we're going to have to fix this immoral, this black dot of slavery on our history, and that's going to come with many of them owning property and voting, and we're going to have to reconcile that. But of course, we shouldn't have the women and children voting in the household who don't work yet and don't pay taxes. So they knew both things before you make that false equivalency. Let me give you some context. 1786, George Washington said, "There is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for this abolition of slavery." 1789, Ben Franklin, "Slavery is an atrocious debasement of human nature." And I know that many people are going to go, "Oh, why didn't they end it?" You couldn't just wave a wand at this point. Right? They were sort of grandfathered in, and they were trying to come up with a plan long term that wouldn't simply destabilize or take away the country that had just been founded. 1819, John Adams, "Every measure of prudence ought to be assumed for this eventual total," word we don't use anymore, "extirpation of slavery from the United States." Now, here's the added context. They, along with that, made it very clear that, of course, not every person should have the right to vote. And they gave answers, reasoning as to why, because that would destroy the country. So, of course, slavery has to be fixed. And, of course, we know that that's going to change some voting. And, of course, just so you guys know, I'm not saying that every Tom, Dick, and Harry who happens to be within the geographical borders here should vote. He wrote, "It is dangerous to open so fruitful a source of controversy and altercation as would be opened by attempting to alter the qualification of voters. There will be no end of it. New claims will arise. Women will demand a vote. Lads from 12 to 21 will think their rights not enough attended to. And every man who has not a farthing will demand an equal voice with any other in all acts of state. It tends to confound and destroy all distinctions and prostrate all ranks to one common." Think about that for a second. These were very forward-thinking people who were against slavery because of their deeply held Christian beliefs. I don't really know how the left can claim that it's wrong, because they really just approach everything with moral relativism and a pragmatic worldview, or at least what they view as pragmatic. Some people would argue slavery is pragmatic for those who benefit from it. These people were forward thinking, and they were very clear and adamant that voting should be limited to those who contribute, have skin in the game, can make and sustain a country, and it needs to be bound to duties as well, like paying taxes, like owning property, like the draft, like in many states, mandatory volunteer firefighter service. In other words, before we talk about universal suffrage, many men did not have the right to vote. Let me be even clearer. Many white men in the United States did not have the right to vote. Don't turn it into a race or a gender thing. In some states, most. And it wasn't controversial. I wonder how the...
It wasn't controversial because they didn't have a transfer of information at this rate that we have today. A lot of the ideologies that you are espousing is, again, a very basic, bare minimum of established society. A lot of these people didn't have the right to vote because they weren't even educated to vote, which I understand the narrative is going to be pushed. You must be educated to vote is still a naive one. Because again, if you want to base yourself off a monarchy, then you're going to pick God's mandate, and God's mandate dictates the smartest and the wisest and the strongest in every way, and experience will just take power. It has nothing to do with the doctrine of democracy. Democracy is supposed to teach you where the people feel and what they're thinking, which is why it's dictated by the masses. This is why if you go to war or you enact slavery, a lot of that slavery is something that you want to get rid of. Then you're going to have to gauge the audience to see who's on your side and who's not on your side. This is why they go to war with the Confederacy, because they saw them, again, voting against them. And they saw their leadership voting against them. You understand who and what are their belief systems, and you understand who your enemies are or who your allies are.
Founding fathers would have reacted if they learned that women, welfare queens, and criminals may be able to vote now. There was an intensity about them back then.
A little bit. They knew how to make a point.
True patriot.
A key, Fast Fact 3 here. Universal suffrage, just to be clear. Now, people talk about the 19th. This isn't about women voting. To be clear, when I say household voting, that means a household has a leader, a de facto leader, and they vote. You shouldn't be able to vote against your own household, a house divided. You guys know all this. So, a widow with children living, of course, she would vote. Now, the left would be opposed to this for the same reason they released that ad of a man monitoring his wife going to the voting booth. And I was watching the same thing going like, yeah, that's a character issue. Canceling each other's vote out. That's not how this country is supposed to be. And that certainly is an environment that encourages a nuclear family. So this is why the left has been on a crusade to expand voting to everyone, legal, illegal, law-abiding, non-law-abiding, minor or adult.
Right now, over 5 million people in the U.S. can't vote as a result of felony disenfranchisement.
Good.
So denying people in prison the right to vote continues a whole history of denying people of color access to representation.
What we have to do is pass a national federal law to register every kid to vote in this country when they turn 18.
Mayo says he can't see a single reason not to let 16-year-olds vote.
16-year-olds in America and 17-year-olds in America can get a job. They pay taxes. They can be taken to court, and they can be tried in courts. As a 17-year-old, you can join the military, right? So you can fight for your country. So all of those things are examples of behavior that looks a lot like the same kinds of responsibilities as an adult.
We see renewed attacks on voting rights across the nation. Name it for what it is. It's an attempt to repress minority voting.
So they talk about criminals, they talk about minors. Let me ask this. Why should anyone who violates the law, why should they be able to vote on the law?
Especially while in prison.
Yeah. Let's say a violent murderer, thief, rapist gets to vote on rape laws. You see the problem, right? That's an extreme example to make a point, but it's an example that the left actually believes in. Now apply the same to social services, to the budget, to taxes? Why should someone who contributes nothing and only takes get to vote how to take? That has never been the case throughout this country until people started believing, because of the progressive left, that everyone should get a vote and everyone has a say. You know what? I'll even give you a compromise. 16, 17-year-olds who work and pay taxes, you know what? Okay, they can vote. That's not enough. You know why? We know how those people would vote. That's usually an industrious young lad out there mowing lawns. He's going to want to keep more of his money. What they want to do is dilute the vote of the American people who were meant to be represented, meaning you, the American worker, the person who is trying to keep a family together, trying to keep a company together, trying to keep a farm together, trying to keep a job going. They want to dilute that vote by expanding voting to everyone, including felons, of course, no voter ID and non-citizens voting, people who, we already have this, contribute nothing to society. You know, the 40-something% who pay nothing in federal income tax, and a big portion of them pay nothing in any taxes whatsoever, and they take far more than they pay in taxes. They will continue to expand these. Why? Because if those who have skin in the game, meaning strong leaders of their communities, of their families, of their workplace, are the primary voters in this country, the Democrat Party doesn't exist. And I know what people are going to say. Well, I don't want my vote to be canceled. Let me ask you this, because this is going to be a lot of women if you're talking about head of household, person whose name is on the deed. Do you share the same worldview as your husband? Are you both Christians, both conservatives? Are you both liberals? Okay. But particularly if you're a Christian conservative woman, do you think that it's a good thing for you to cancel out his vote if you don't vote the same way? But let's assume that you vote the same way. How does it affect you negatively? It's submitting to a head of household, the person who also has skin in the game, period. And if you're a woman who's the head of household, great, vote. Doesn't that seem fair? Doesn't that seem reasonable? And doesn't that actually safeguard the vote that really should matter? It's not a universal right. It is a privilege. And it is a privilege afforded to those who keep a country alive. Put it this way. Let's take one extreme. What we always had, household voting. Property owners, taxpayers, only they vote. What would you have? You'd have a much more balanced budget. You have a much more highly functioning country. May have some laws that you don't like because you don't agree with their opinions. Fine. Take the flip side, the ideal voting base for the current Democrat Party. People who pay nothing in taxes, criminals, non-citizens. What would you have? You would have no country. That's the direction they want to go. Policy states, by the way, household voting, which was again de facto U.S. policy. If you look at the prerequisites, it was an idea that was also popularized and gained momentum. For example, in 19th century France, there were several people, but the main one was Alphonse de Lamartine. How do you say it?
Lamartine.
Lamartine. Is that how you guys would say it in English? Okay, I always have to say it the wrong way.
Lamartine.
Where they even believed in weighted household voting, where all of the household votes go to one head of household to vote. That included children. Now, why? Because they said individuals leave, individuals die, but families remain. Shouldn't we base our government off of the people who will remain and the people who will have to deal with the consequences? And if this rubs anyone the wrong way, I would ask you why. Why is it a virtue for all people to vote? Why should people who educate themselves, zero, who follow the law, zero, who contribute to taxes, zero, why should they cancel out your vote who's trying to keep everything together? Because it's also better for them. And that's not, by the way, anti-freedom, because no one is required to stay here. But it would create a framework for our laws that would make...
I do agree with this concept to a certain degree, right? So the issue he has is that if you cannot impression your ideology onto other people and they come here with a different country's ideology, he thinks of the same way that Asmongold or Trump would say, you import the third world, you get the third world, is because they impression their environment onto this land tell you policies that don't work but work for them specifically in their old place, and they wish it to happen here, but we don't have the money or resource because we're just going to be accommodating their lifestyle instead of accommodating the economy or the infrastructure that we need as a society. The problem with this, of course, is you tend to have a white only society, which is, again, they think it's anti-white to say it's okay to have different opinions. But this entire nation, as he dictated earlier, he said it was never meant to always be just for white people or even for all people to be able to vote, which is proof of its evolution, not your supposed admiration of just devolving yourself to the past. You're supposed to understand other people have different perspectives, other people have different cultures that you can learn off of, and those different cultures and strengths that we have is what makes this country so great. Issue I see he has that I agree with. He's worried a bunch of uneducated people are going to vote for a naive person that's very unexperienced, unqualified, doesn't know what they're doing, and then just gets there because people think they're just pretty or good looking, or even worse, they just sound nice. And that's going to lead to a lot of people voting for policies that'll kill millions of people potentially, or even turn us against each other and collapse the economy along with the people within it. Which, of course, they just complain and just say, well, if you don't like that, just kick me out, which is a concept of which you should not have as a leader. You should not have the concept, if I'm not good enough, fire me. A lot of these people that currently reside on the left use purity testing. This purity testing is going to backfire on them because now they're going to have to get votes from people who are not pure, who are not supposed to be seen as people who are worthy of voting, but they spent their whole life canceling those exact types of people. Which now, of course, is going to enact the right wing's ideology of saying, why are they even able to vote to begin with if a lot of these people are pedophiles, rapists, serial killers, and invaders of another country and another ideology? A lot of them are going to obey the right wing's perspective. They're just not going to obey the generic conversation. This is why they always make excuses for their inner circle. Their inner circle is inexperienced people who don't know what they're doing. This is why their ideology oftentimes pushes people to homelessness, pushes people down to the EBT, and that's where they get the welfare queens. Because in their ideology, it's easier to control the miseducated or disinformation because a lot of them are simple minded. They believe they're going to capitulate unconditionally and they can find a million more poor people by importing them that they can tell the same exact template sentence that they give to them, where the previous generation learned better and told them that they're not exactly as smart as they think they are. So, the left goal is to shotgun method this, get as much women and as much immigrants as possible to vote for them while disregarding any of the men's opinions or any of the people of color's opinions, because those are the ones that will fight the war. They'll send them to their death if they have to, or they'll just disregard them and push them homelessness and make fun of them, giving them inferiority complex, which is why the divide within the left happens a lot, because oftentimes they have to use guilt trips or victimhood in order to take control, which is why we don't get anything for voting for the Democrat Party at all. There's nothing in return for that. You get disrespected, you get put down, you get told white men are superior than you, and then you get white men who are brown on the inside. And then as soon as you're finally able to tell them that what they're doing is disgusting and wrong, they'll find a brown person the same race as you who has suffered the same exact as you have and tell you this person succeeded, so why can't you? And they tokenize your success, they tokenize your economy, they tokenize the standards of which you lived in. And then if none of that works, they'll blackmail you and slander you until you're nothing to them. This is why they have an extermination unit in the left. They kill you off because they can get 10 brown people just like me in order to vote for them, and that 10 matters way more than one intelligent one. And then eventually you kick out all the smart people, you kick out all the intelligent men, you create a circle of the right wing that they just call fascist and evil that just starts to take power by using common sense and logic and reason. It's strange, but this is how they always collapse because they always want to side with the simpleton, but the simpleton can be convinced by the intelligence, the person that leads, the person that tells them what's happening. This is why I always try to tell people that the people that lead are the ones that matter, but not the ones that were just chosen by a democracy of fools. This is why a democracy of fools leads to a collapse of democracy and the rising up of a fascistic one. Because if you depend on the uneducated and you depend on the simple minded, a lot of people are just going to call you the simple minded people, that of which don't know what you are truly doing. You're just trying to get the crumbs off the master, which is just a white Republican. And when you get those crumbs from the master, you beg and you beg and you beg like the dog you are. And then you eventually get what you want. And then you think that's victory. You didn't win, you got permission. A lot of these people on the left are not prepared for this upcoming election because they're just going for the temporary win. They're going for the lame duck. They're going for the hope that the Republicans go so overboard that the next runner-up is someone who isn't going to be able to hold it all back, but instead someone who's just going to keep going forward, so they keep failing and failing and failing. The Darwin of the leftist group is just social lynch mobs, which is old school liberalism that killed a lot of black people, hung them from trees, killed Latinos, shot them dead, told them they're not like us or the rest of us, and then they otherized them in order to create a divisive ideology, ridiculed and mocked them and called them an inferior species without saying it, because now they factored out inferior species with canceled or allegations or accusations until they have an entire group of people that just completely rip away any sort of coalition or group building. Which they'll say, this guy's a monster, this guy's a monster, and they'll skip due process, they'll skip the concept because they'll wait until it's a perfect time to strike instead of just getting due process and actual justice off the bat. This is why a lot of them pick white people off the bat. This is why they solidify themselves with white people. Because a lot of them know that even the black and brown that they make fun of and put into inferiority complex, they can get to obey them just because they have a white person there. Which is why it's easy to manipulate the simple people, the women and the immigrant. This is why a lot of the civil rights movements argue with each other because they just got a token or a slave to side with the Democrat Party rather than an actual educated and individual person that believes in the socialist concepts of uplifting everyone at the bottom, and the rugged individualism at the top is deserved because they always brag about it. Instead, they reverse it. They tell us that we deserve the rugged individualism, we deserve to starve, we deserve to be homeless, we are nothing but a slave to them. And then they have the socialism of the rich where all of them are at the top and they all just have tons of resources for one another. They love each other and tribalize it. And then they create the elite circle that just wars against anyone who goes against them. And when they war, they just slander and defame and tell everyone else that they're inferior to them and deserve slavery. They use agitative propaganda and they use talking points that of which are simplistic to they can laugh and mimic the behaviors of which they think won the race, which was just behavior of what they think is ridiculing people, when in actuality they use Darwinism and they use actual policies and regulations that actually lifted the entire economy, got the working class actual more jobs, and actually got a union together rather than the ideology of the left that can barely sustain a unionized front.
A lot more sense for those who actually care to follow them. So my solution has always been the same. I actually distilled it down. As long as you have the draft, mandatory selective service, only those in the draft vote. So either everyone's drafted or there's no draft. You, of course, have to be a legal citizen, have to pay taxes, household voting. You never get a Marxist, socialist, leftist again. It cannot happen. Would you be on board? This is not hyperbole. I'm as serious as a heart attack.
Yeah. No, and we should be having this conversation. I want to go to the base point of this was dependence. They thought that any man that was dependent on another man would actually be incentivized to vote that man's interests and have some kind of manipulation possible on him to vote that way. And so they said, landowners, we need people who own property, people who are not dependent on others so they can vote based on their own interests to be represented. Right? Not selfishly, because for a landowner to be prosperous, the community has to be prosperous and things have to go well, right? So you're somewhat tied to that. Think about how we do it today. The people that are most dependent on the thing that was never supposed to provide dependence, the government.
Right.
Of course they wouldn't have wanted people dependent on the government, because then you'll vote for the government to be something it was never intended to be, the provider for everyone. Mm-hmm. It makes perfect sense when you start thinking about, well, they didn't want manipulation. Go back to the household thing. Not just, do you think it's okay for people to cancel out each other's votes? Do you think it's good that we should create a system that incentivizes dividing families?
Right.
Because that's exactly what happens. Women are targeted and picked off. Your husband doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to politics. Thank God the women are now in charge. Finally, the women can have a voice.
Yeah.
And you go against your husband, maybe in a way that you never would have otherwise. Mm-hmm. That's the incentive that it creates.
Well, and the problem that we have, too, you'll see a lot of feminists, you'll see a lot of women say, well, women actually vote in greater numbers than men. That is true. And on every single empirical study that we've conducted, and there have been many, they're significantly less politically educated than men. So they vote more often with far less information. Yeah. That's a fact.
Well, this idea of to create and maintain a country, that's really key. And these guys at that time had enough experience with pure democracies to know that they killed themselves. Mm-hmm. And this was the way to avoid that. Mm-hmm. And the idea of the weighted household, I think, is great, because that's the microcosm of representative government. If you represent more in your household, maybe your vote carries a little more heft.
That's what they talked about in France, because they saw a problem, with replacement rates, birth rates. This is a problem that people have tried to solve since the beginning of humanity. Right? Be fruitful and multiply. We've gone the other way because of little bitches like Greta Thunberg. But this isn't new. The fact that this is considered radical tells you how effective the propaganda has been. And so I just ask, when people say everyone within the United States should have the right to vote. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
So, question to you. So, in thinking about
if you
this,
contribute nothing, just one more analogy. If you go out to dinner, okay, everyone agrees to split the bill. You're the only one who doesn't contribute. Forgot my wallet. Should you have a say in determining what other people eat? Or should you sit down, shut up, and be grateful that you're at the table?
Maybe.
I think dynamics of economy are much more complex than eating food for free. I believe that in the humane conditions where that person is starving to death, then yes, they should have at least some say in getting the food because they are the ones starving to death. If I go there and say you should be grateful for the food and I buy you a single crouton, I would highly doubt that anyone would go there and be grateful for the food. Democracy is built on the idea that humanity was supposed to take care of each other, but has instead proven itself to be a Darwinistic principle of exploitative measure. Which is why a lot of these people take advantage of one another, true, but that's not the natural course of nature. That's the course of nature under an exploitative measure, which means you are in an oasis and no one's built a farm on it. You still have the oasis where people fight for the water and the small amounts of fruit that are there. You're supposed to take the fruit from the seeds, or the seeds from the fruit, and plant it to build a garden. You are not supposed to fight for it forever. You are supposed to create a dynamic where you actually can sustain humanity, and then after humanity, you compete for a better life. It's not supposed to just hand you the Lamborghini. It's not supposed to just hand you the best life ever. You're supposed to have a baseline of humanity that you build upon. That's what the whole concept of the social safety net is. It's called that in its word, safety net. So when you fall and you get fired or you don't have a job and you've been looking, and then you hit the bottom, you don't just starve to death and die and have to commit crimes to survive while people discriminate against you and call you an inferior species. You actually have something to eat and put in your mouth and have something in your belly and then have education you can go to and have a potential job prospect given to you. You're not just abandoned and thrown away. You still have access to humanity. It's not about privilege. It's about access to human rights.
I don't have a farthing to my name.
I don't have a farthing.
Yeah.
A shilling, perhaps.
Don't extirpate my farthing.
Well, it's worse than that. It's not that they just dictate what other people eat. I mean, that would be bad enough. It's that they order the filet mignon and a bottle of Dom for themselves and expect everybody else to foot the bill.
Right.
That is the problem with this. It's like, yeah, of course I'm going to vote stuff for myself that doesn't make any sense for the rest of society. But my question to you is this conversation, I think we need to do even more on this because this needs to happen. This is a really big problem that I don't think we've addressed. Would you be willing to do this at a federal versus state level and maybe go initial first steps, like federal level, what we've talked about? State level, if you want to do some kind of version of this, but like baby steps this thing to happen, because I feel like people just automatically reject it if they feel like you're disenfranchising them, and there's no real way around that.
Well, the states are the great incubators, right? The test cases. We've got 50 of them. Let's see how that works. Is that what you meant?
I want one.
Did you mean go broader first and then go back?
I meant, like, I think it makes more sense at a federal level saying, okay, well, you're not paying anything in federal taxes. You're not contributing to this nation. You aren't signed up for the war, which is a purview of the government that's legitimate. Like, okay, you don't vote for president and, you know, whatever other federal kind of things, you know, senator, maybe. I think that's obviously still tied to the state. So you can vote in that, but you don't vote for president. Let's just put it at that. President. You're not voting in that.
Yeah. Any one of these would have a monumental impact that would be insurmountable for the progressive left.
It's not just for that reason, though. It's because it's fair. They see an agenda coming if we frame it that way. Oh, they just want to minimize us.
Well,
they just want to marginalize us.
That is what their agenda is. In other words, the only reason that we consider this the norm, it's normalcy bias. Yeah. It's normalcy bias now, and that's how they've managed to scam their way in. I mean, if you don't go to household voting, okay, great. You have to pay taxes and you have to have proof of citizenship, period, right? That's being fought. Why?
I know.
Why? Because there is one wing politically that wants. I mean, go back to that analogy where you said filet and Dom Perignon. People are going to go like, oh, okay. Go drive through a rough area and tell me how many, was it Chrysler 300s? What's that car? Chrysler 300s and Cadillacs and smartphones and spinners you see.
And Jordans.
And go to the...
He's talking about black people. Like, this is why I watch sometimes this guy, so I can get a deeper analysis of how racist white people live in societies that they've never seen a black person before, so I could get their intake and understand how they think about the world. It's why I love reviewing stuff like this. Like, not everyone deserves a voting rights. It followed up by talking about Jordans and getting filet mignon on EBT and simulating the concept of just black people ruining society is why I love watching this, because it reminds me there's people so much worse than anyone I've ever met before, and that their concept of hatred and just reality is just pure hatred and racism, which, by the way, I have met people like this before. I'm just saying that he has a show about it. He actually has a platform for it. The people I've met like this who talk like this, it is like a revamp from my childhood or my earlier youth, where I talk to these people a lot, and a lot of their ideology is just exactly the same as a psychopath. And they do have friends that watch Charlie Kirk and believe in the right wing belief system because they believe in Darwinism. I think these are the most psychotic human beings on the planet Earth. I every time I watch one of these people, I just remind myself that why AOC is someone I might vote for one day, and that's an embarrassing point for me to say because that person probably hates people like me with a passion. It's just insane that these people actually exist like this. I don't know how, like, when you see this, you realize the earlier commentary he gave where they killed religious people and he says he's religious. I start to wonder if they're these people they killed.
The local kick store and see the lineup around the block.
Yeah.
Guarantee you that if you're probably 30-something%, yeah, 30, at least a third, pay nothing in taxes and receive social services.
Yeah.
It is quite literally like someone else ordering filet and champagne while you wear hand-me-downs, while you maybe go to a thrift store, while you try and make the most or stretch, your beans and rice as far as you can. That is, when people say two different Americas, yeah, I do view America as having two different classes. People with zero compression of responsibility and duty, and those who have it. And their votes count the same.
Yeah.
So have this discussion, too, in your household, with your family. It might mean that some of you are not individually voting, but your household is. Or it might mean that some people in your household, because they contribute, because they pay taxes, are voting and you are not, or vice versa. Is that a trade you'd be willing to make? And here's something I would just want one candidate for presidency to not back down from this and go, yeah, well, I think that as long as we have the draft, obviously, only those who are required to register for the draft. So let's have a vote on keeping the draft but for everybody, or doing away with it. But there'll be consequences to that if we have any kind of an invasion. Just putting that on the table, because most people aren't aware of it. When you bring it up, people go, well, no, I mean, just don't register. It's a crime. In the United States, if you do not register for the draft as a young man, you are immediately a criminal at 18 years old.
Yeah, there's a news story right now circulating. Like, everybody's like, oh, look at the draft. By the end of this year, I think it's automatic registration. So they're automatically going to register you for the draft. So people are like, see, they're going to draft you into fighting Israel's war. No, they're just going to make it so people don't forget anymore.
Yeah.
And you're automatically registered. Now, you can argue about the draft all you want, but nothing really changed.
Well, not people, men.
No, I know.
Yeah, only men.
Men.
Only men. It's that male privilege.
And I would add, if you can fight for your country at 18, you can have a beer.
Sure.
We're all right with that. Are we clear with that?
I get it. That's fine. What I always find,
you take on terrorists, have a beer when you're done.
What I always find funny is people going, she's that woman, that girl, she's 22 and she's with a 40-year-old. He's manipulating her. He's a predator. Like, oh yeah, because she can't make good decisions yet. Her brain's not
so she can't vote
fully formed, but she can vote. Well, yeah, but that's a right. Why?
There you go.
You just said no judgment. By the way, I don't agree with that, but you can't have it both ways. Oh, you're still here.
Thank you for watching. You're gonna have more coverage like this. A lot of these white people exist in the Democrat Party, so they just pretend to be people of actual care. I believe the Clintons are probably one of the most racist people I know, because their entire Epstein list, guest list, is probably one of the most gross shit I've ever seen. You have a lot of people associated with a lot of the weakest people in the Democrat Party, just encouraging them to be more weak because victimhood is a currency. I'm going to be covering a lot of this ideology because I want to break down the white supremacists to a complete factorable formula, so all of you can really start to understand how simple these people are. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well, since we're both on this page.